At 8:17 p.m., Vivian was a discarded wife standing alone in a ruined anniversary gown. By midnight, she would become the woman who ended a dynasty. Her husband, Julian, had chosen the cruelest possible stage for betrayal, their anniversary banquet, surrounded by executives, relatives, and society reporters. He accused her of being worthless, ordered security to remove her, and announced that his mistress would soon take her place. His mother delivered the final wound by revealing she had burned Vivian's wedding dress, calling it a favor to the family. The mistress smiled because she believed Vivian's humiliation cleared her path to Julian's fortune and the billion-dollar contract she had been chasing. But the contract belonged to Veyron Crown Holdings, and Veyron Crown Holdings belonged to Vivian. As she reached the entrance, 12 Maybachs swept into the driveway, and royal guards stepped out under the glare of camera flashes. They bowed, called her Your Grace and Chairwoman, and escorted her back inside. One look from Vivian ended the celebration. One signature ended the mistress's dream. One investigation sent Julian to prison. The banquet hall had gone so silent that Vivian could hear the ice settling in untouched champagne glasses. A minute earlier, the orchestra had been playing a soft waltz under the crystal chandeliers. Reporters had been murmuring near the floral arch. Executives from half the country's largest companies had been pretending not to stare at Julian Cross and the woman in gold silk on his arm. Evelyn Cross, Julian's mother, had been seated at the head table like a queen carved from frost, her diamonds sharp enough to wound. Now every eye was on Vivian. Her silver anniversary gown was torn at the hem where security had grabbed it. A streak of red wine stained the bodice, thrown there by accident or design when Julian's mistress, Serafina Vale, had stumbled into her with a smile too practiced to be innocent. Vivian's hair had loosened from its pinned waves, one dark curl brushing her cheek. In her hand, she still held the small pearl clutch Julian had given her 5 years ago, back when gifts from him had felt like affection instead of repayment for her silence. The royal guards stood in 2 perfect rows behind her. Their black uniforms bore a crest no one in the hall could ignore, a silver crown above a thorned rose. It was the old insignia of the Ashbourne house, a family so wealthy, so private, and so powerful that their name appeared in history books more often than business magazines. To the public, they were old nobility. To governments, they were investors. To corporations, they were kingmakers. To Vivian, they had once been a locked door. The tallest guard, Commander Alastair Thorne, stepped forward and bowed again. "Your Grace," he said, his voice deep enough to cross the room without a microphone, "the board is assembled. The emergency authority papers are ready." A whisper traveled through the banquet hall. "Your Grace." Julian stared at Vivian, as if the words had struck him harder than any hand could have. Serafina's smile, bright and triumphant only moments before, faltered at the edges. Her fingers tightened around Julian's arm. Evelyn Cross stopped breathing for 3 full seconds, though only Vivian noticed. Vivian had spent years watching Evelyn's face for signs of danger. A narrowed eye before an insult, a tilted chin before a punishment, a soft smile before humiliation. She knew every weapon the woman carried. But tonight, Vivian carried sharper ones. Julian found his voice first. "What is this?" he demanded, stepping down from the stage. "Vivian, what game are you playing?" The old Vivian, the woman he thought he knew, might have lowered her eyes. She might have apologized for the disruption, even though she had caused none of it. She might have tried to explain quietly, to soften the truth for the man who had sharpened lies against her. But that woman had been buried a few minutes earlier under the ashes of a wedding dress. Vivian looked at him and said, "The only game tonight was yours." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The hall carried them with perfect cruelty. Julian's jaw clenched. He glanced at the reporters, then at the executives, calculating damage. Vivian had watched him do this for years. Julian Cross could turn betrayal into a misunderstanding, cruelty into leadership, and greed into ambition if given enough time and enough witnesses willing to be bought. That was why she had chosen tonight to stop giving him time. "Security," Julian snapped. No one moved. The two men who had dragged Vivian toward the entrance only minutes earlier stood frozen near the doors, their faces pale. One looked at the royal guards and slowly stepped back. The other avoided Vivian's eyes altogether. Commander Thorne turned his head slightly. That was all. The hall understood. Julian's face darkened. "This is my banquet, my family's event." Vivian took one step toward him. "No," she said. "It is held in a hotel owned by Veron Crown Holdings, sponsored by a foundation funded by Veron Crown Holdings, attended by investors whose portfolios are tied to Veron Crown Holdings, and staged under permit approved, because Veron Crown Holdings guaranteed the venue." She stopped at the foot of the stage. "And Veron Crown Holdings belongs to me." For a moment, the world did not react. The sentence was too large, too impossible. It hung above the gold tables and white roses like thunder waiting to break. Then the room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes burst like lightning. Executives whispered into phones. Someone dropped a glass. Serafina took one step back, as if the floor had shifted beneath her heels. Julian laughed once sharply. "That's absurd." Vivian turned her eyes to him. "Is it?" "You," his voice rose, cracking at the edge. "You barely managed the household accounts. You never even understood what I did at Cross Meridian." A painful smile touched Vivian's mouth. There it was, the lie he had loved most, that she was simple, decorative, grateful, that because she had chosen silence, she had no mind, that because she had folded his shirts, remembered his mother's medicine, arranged dinners, and stood beside him at charity events, she had forgotten how to command. It reminded her of another room, 15 years ago, paneled in dark walnut and filled with men twice her age. She had been 21 then, wearing a plain navy dress and her grandfather's watch. Lord Edmund Ashbourne, her grandfather, had sat at the head of the table, thin from illness but still terrifying. Around him, board members had argued about whether Vivian was ready to inherit voting control. "She is too young," one had said. "She is too gentle," said another. Her grandfather had lifted one trembling hand, and the room fell silent. "Gentleness," he said, "is not weakness, it is power under discipline." Then he had turned to Vivian. "Do you know why our crest is a rose with thorns?" "Because beauty needs protection," Vivian had answered. His eyes had warmed. "No, child, because those who reach carelessly for what is beautiful deserve to blade." That night he signed the first of many documents transferring hidden authority to her. By the time the world believed Veron Crown Holdings belonged to committees, trusts, and faceless offshore structures, the true controlling vote sat in Vivian's hands. And by the time Julian Cross met her, she had already learned that the safest throne was the one no one knew existed. "You're right," Vivian told Julian. "I never understood what you did at Cross Meridian, not at first." Julian's nostrils flared. "But I understood enough to know when invoices were doubled, when shell vendors were created, when charitable funds disappeared before reaching hospitals, when your mother's private accounts received money the board never approved." Vivian's gaze shifted briefly to Evelyn. "And when Serafina Vale's company submitted a proposal using documents stolen from Veron's internal bidding system." Serafina went still. It was the first honest thing she had done all night. Julian spun toward her. "What is she talking about?" Serafina's lips parted. "Julian, she's lying." Vivian almost admired how quickly the mistress recovered. Serafina Vale was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, polished, arranged, and designed to make others feel underdressed. She had entered Vivian's life 6 months earlier as an independent consultant. Julian insisted was essential to a new expansion deal. Within 2 weeks, Serafina was at Julian's side in meetings. Within a month, she was laughing too freely at family dinners. Within 3 months, Evelyn was calling her the sort of woman a cross man should have married. Vivian had known long before the lipstick on Julian's collar. Not because Julian was careless. Because Serafina was. She wore ambition like perfume, too much, too sweet, impossible to ignore. The first warning had arrived in the form of a misplaced file. Vivian had been in Julian's study one rainy evening, looking for a property tax document Evelyn had accused her of losing. Julian had left his laptop open. A folder on the screen bore the name VCH SAFA Procurement. Vivian had stared at it long enough for her pulse to slow. VCH. Veyron Crown Holdings. At the time, Veyron had been preparing a private infrastructure contract worth nearly $1 billion. Only invited bidders knew the project details. Only senior procurement officers had the technical scoring model. Julian should not have had any of it. When Vivian clicked the folder, she found Serafina's company proposal built around confidential Veyron data. Not guesses, not market research, direct extracts. She had closed the laptop before Julian returned. She had asked nothing. She had smiled through dinner while Evelyn mocked the soup. Later that night, she sent a single encrypted message to the Ashbourne legal office. Begin internal trace. That was 4 months ago. Since then, she had collected everything. Julian's stolen passwords, Evelyn's transfers, Serafina's bribes to a procurement assistant, Cross Meridian's fake vendors, the offshore accounts named after dead relatives, the political favors, the forged signatures. Even the dress. Especially the dress. Vivian's wedding dress had not been merely silk and lace. It had been made from Ashbourne ceremonial fabric, sewn with silver thread so fine it shimmered only under candlelight. Her grandmother had worn part of it. Her mother had planned to wear it before illness took her. Vivian wore it the day she married Julian in a small chapel hidden behind old roses and winter fog. Julian had cried that day. She still remembered it. That memory was perhaps the cruelest part of all. He had stood beneath the chapel arch, young and earnest, his hands shaking as he lifted her veil. He was not yet the arrogant man on the banquet stage. He was Julian Cross, second son of a ruthless family, desperate to prove he could be kind. He had found Vivian outside a charity auction 2 years earlier after her car broke down in the rain. He had offered his coat, then his umbrella, then coffee at a tiny shop where the lights flickered and the owner called everyone darling. He had not known her name. Not her real one. She introduced herself as Vivian Gray, a quiet foundation analyst with no grand family and no fortune worth chasing. He talked about wanting to build something honest. She talked about hospitals, books, and the strange loneliness of growing up surrounded by people who bowed but never stayed. He made her laugh. That had been the first danger. For months, Vivian let herself believe she had found someone who loved the woman and not the crown behind her. When he proposed, he gave her no diamond, only a thin gold ring engraved with a line from a poem she had once quoted. The heart knows its home before the world knows its name. Her grandfather warned her. Do not confuse being unseen with being loved, Lord Edmund had said from his sickbed the winter before the wedding. Some people cherish what they discover, others resent what they cannot control. Vivian kissed his hand and promised she would be careful. But love had made her hopeful, and hope had made her careless. For the first 2 years, Julian was gentle. He sent flowers to her office. He carried her heels after long dinners. He defended her when Evelyn complained Vivian was too plain, too quiet, too unsuitable for a rising Cross man. Then Cross Meridian began failing. Then Julian's elder brother died unexpectedly in a sailing accident, leaving Julian the heir. Then Evelyn turned her full attention on her remaining son. And everything soft in Julian slowly hardened. At first the changes were small. He stopped asking about Vivian's day. He corrected her in public. He laughed when Evelyn said Vivian had a servant's instinct. He apologized afterward, always with tired eyes and excuses about pressure. Then the apologies stopped. 3 years into the marriage, Vivian learned that love could decay without dying. It could remain in the house like a smell no one mentioned. She would pass Julian in the hallway and remember the rain-soaked man who gave her his coat. Then he would look through her as if she were furniture, and the memory would cut deeper than hatred. The first time he stayed out all night, he sent flowers. The second time, he sent nothing. By the fifth time, Evelyn told Vivian, a wife who cannot hold her husband should at least know how to hold her tongue. Vivian held it. Not because she was weak. Because her grandfather had taught her that a thorn drawn too early only warns the hand. Now in the banquet hall, Evelyn rose slowly from her chair. Her diamonds flashed under the chandeliers. "This is a disgrace," she said. "Vivian has always been unstable. Grief does things to women without children, you know. She creates fantasies." The insult landed exactly where Evelyn intended. A few guests looked away, others leaned closer. Vivian felt the old wound stir, but it did not open. Years ago, she had wanted children. Julian had two, or claimed he did. After 2 miscarriages, Evelyn began leaving brochures for fertility clinics on Vivian's pillow. After the third, she stopped pretending concern and began calling Vivian barren when no outsiders were present. Julian heard it once. He had said nothing. Later, when Vivian cried in the bathroom, he stood outside the door and told her his mother was old-fashioned and did not mean harm. That night, Vivian understood that neglect could be a verdict. Now Evelyn tried to use that same wound as a chain. Vivian did not give her the satisfaction of flinching. "Commander," she said. Thorne opened the black folder and removed a document sealed in silver wax. He handed it to Vivian with both hands. Julian scoffed, but his eyes followed the seal. He knew enough about old power to fear paper more than shouting. Vivian broke the seal. At 7:45 this evening, the Emergency Board of Veyron Crown Holdings voted to suspend all negotiations with Vale Lux Strategic Consulting pending investigation. At 7:52, they froze all transactions involving Cross Meridian and its affiliates. At 8:03, they authorized me, as controlling owner, to initiate legal disclosure to regulators. Serafina whispered, "No." Vivian turned to her. "Your proposal for the Crown Rail modernization project is void." Serafina's face drained. There were many kinds of ruin. Some arrived as scandal, some as bankruptcy. Serafina's arrived as arithmetic. The Crown Rail contract was everything. Without it, Vale Lux had no projected revenue, no investor confidence, and no reason for the banks to extend her credit lines. She had leveraged offices, staff, and reputation on the promise that Julian could deliver influence and stolen insight. She had mistaken proximity to power for possession of it. Vivian knew the mistake well. Julian took a step forward. "You can't do this." "I already did. I am your husband." The hall seemed to inhale. Vivian looked at the man who had once stood in the rain with an umbrella angled more over her than himself. She searched his face for a trace of that man and found only entitlement wearing his skin. "No," she said softly, "you were my husband." He recoiled as if the past tense had struck him. Evelyn slammed one palm on the table. "Enough, Julian, do not let this woman humiliate this family." Vivian looked at Evelyn then, truly looked at her. For years, Evelyn Cross had ruled by making others fear exclusion. She decided who sat near her at dinners, who received invitations, who was praised, who was erased. She had treated Vivian like a stain on the Cross name, never knowing that the Cross name had survived only because Vivian had quietly allowed Veyron-backed banks to extend loans, restructure debt, and delay exposure. Evelyn had lived under Vivian's roof while calling her homeless. A memory rose without permission. Vivian, newly married, standing in Evelyn's conservatory with a tray of tea because Evelyn had dismissed the staff to see if the girl knew useful work. Vivian had burned her wrist on the kettle. Evelyn had watched the skin redden and said, "A noble woman would never show pain." Vivian had answered, "My grandmother said the same thing." Evelyn laughed. "Your grandmother was probably a laundress." Vivian had hidden the Ashbourne signet ring on a chain beneath her dress and said nothing. That ring now rested against her heart. Mrs. Cross, Vivian said, you burned my wedding dress. Evelyn's mouth curved. It was an ugly relic. It was protected heritage property of the Ashbourne estate. That single sentence changed Evelyn's expression. For the first time all night, she looked old. Vivian continued, you ordered 2 staff members to remove it from my private storage room this afternoon. You instructed your driver to take it to the garden incinerator at Cross House. You recorded a video of the burning and sent it to me from an anonymous number at 6:12 p.m. Julian turned to his mother. You filmed it. Evelyn's gaze flickered. She needed to understand. No, Vivian said, you needed to feel powerful. The black folder contained more than contract suspensions. Vivian removed a second page. The dress was insured, registered, and legally classified as part of a private historical collection. The destruction has been reported. Evelyn gave a brittle laugh. You would send police after me for a dress. No, Vivian said. For the dress, the embezzlement, the witness intimidation, and the conspiracy to falsify cross-meridian accounts. A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, not quite a groan. Julian's eyes flashed, careful. Vivian tilted her head. You used to say that to me when I almost told the truth. He stepped closer. The guards did not move, but every person in the room felt their readiness. Julian lowered his voice. Vivian, whatever you think you have, we can discuss it privately. There it was, the pivot, the old performance. His tone softened, his eyes warmed, and he became the husband from the rain again, the one who knew how to make regret look like love. For a dangerous second, memory rose. Julian kneeling beside her after the first miscarriage, holding her hand in both of his, crying into the hospital blanket. Julian reading to her when she could not sleep. Julian whispering, I don't care about heirs, I only care about you. Had that been true? Maybe. That was the cruelest thing about betrayal. It did not always mean every tender moment had been false. Sometimes the love had been real, and the person had chosen ambition anyway. Vivian's fingers tightened around the document. In her mind, her grandfather's voice returned. Some people cherish what they discover. Others resent what they cannot control. You had 7 years to speak to me privately, she said. Tonight, you chose an audience. Julian's face hardened again. The mask dropped. Do you think these people will respect you after this? He hissed. A hidden woman playing queen, you'll be torn apart. Vivian looked around the hall. The guests watched her with fear, curiosity, and calculation. Respect would come later, or not at all. She no longer cared. She had not come to be admired. She had come to end something rotten before it spread further. My grandfather once told me that sunlight does not ask permission to expose a room, Vivian said. It simply enters. She turned to the reporters. You may record this. The room exploded into motion. Julian shouted, no. But microphones were already lifted. Cameras refocused. Live streams began. Within seconds, the private humiliation Julian had planned for his wife became public testimony against him. Vivian stepped onto the stage. Only then did she feel the ache in her ankle from where her heel had twisted during the struggle at the door. Only then did she feel the wine drying cold against her skin. Only then did she notice that her hands were shaking. She placed the black folder on the podium. Serafina moved suddenly, rushing toward the stage. Vivian, please. Her voice was no longer honey, it was raw panic. We can fix this. I didn't know who you were. Vivian looked down at her. You knew I was his wife. Serafina stopped. The words were simple, they cut clean. I was told your marriage was over, Serafina whispered. Vivian almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the excuse was so ordinary beneath all the expensive ruin. My marriage was many things, Vivian said, but it was not yours to use. Serafina's eyes filled, though Vivian could not tell if the tears were fear, regret, or a final attempt at performance. Julian said you were nothing. He said you were dependent on him. He believed that, Vivian said. You believed him because it benefited you. Serafina swallowed. For a moment, Vivian saw not a villain in gold silk, but a woman who had mistaken conquest for survival. Perhaps Serafina had her own childhood of closed doors, her own hunger, her own reasons, but reasons did not erase choices. Pain did not excuse cruelty. Ambition did not absolve theft. Vivian turned away. Commander Thorne. The commander stepped beside her. Please escort Miss Vale to the side room. The regulatory officers will need her statement. Serafina looked at Julian. Do something. Julian did not move. That more than anything broke her. Two guards approached. They did not touch her at first. They simply waited. Serafina looked around and realized no one was coming to save her. Not Julian, not Evelyn, not the investors who had praised her brilliance, not the reporters she had charmed. She lifted her chin with the last of her pride and walked between the guards toward the side doors. As she passed Vivian, she whispered, "You could have warned me." Vivian answered quietly, "I did. Every time I stayed silent, you mistook it for permission." Serafina flinched and kept walking. Julian's control was unraveling now. Vivian could see it in the small details, the pulse jumping at his temple, the sweat at his collar, the way he kept glancing toward exits. For years, he had built rooms where he controlled every door. Tonight, every door belonged to someone else. Evelyn understood faster than he did. She stepped away from the head table and approached Vivian with a smile so delicate it might have fooled anyone who did not know her. "My dear," she said, warm enough for the cameras, "this has gone too far. Families have disagreements. You are upset, I understand." Vivian watched her climb the stage steps. Evelyn extended a hand. It was the same hand that had once snatched an invitation from Vivian's fingers, because wives without achievements should not stand in receiving lines. The same hand that had pushed a family heirloom necklace toward Serafina that morning and said loudly enough for Vivian to hear, "Some women look born for diamonds." The same hand that had held a lighter in the video of the burning dress. Vivian did not take it. Evelyn's smile tightened. "My son behaved foolishly," Evelyn said. "Men do, but you are not a foolish girl. Think about what you gain by destroying him." Vivian leaned closer. "Peace." For once, Evelyn had no answer. Then she lowered her voice so only Vivian could hear. "You think power will protect you from loneliness? I made this family what it is. I buried my husband, my eldest son, my pride, and half my soul to keep this name alive. You will learn. A woman alone is either useful or forgotten." Vivian felt something unexpected then. Not pity exactly. Recognition. Evelyn had not been born cruel. No one was. She had been shaped by a world that taught her to worship family names, sons, wealth, and control. She had survived by becoming harder than everyone who tried to break her. Then she mistook hardness for strength and passed the blade down. But understanding a cage did not require stepping inside it. "You kept a name alive," Vivian said. "You killed everything good inside it." Evelyn's eyes shone with hatred. Vivian turned back to the microphones. "For the record, I am announcing 3 actions tonight. First, Veron Crown Holdings terminates all pending negotiations with companies under investigation for procurement fraud, including Vale Lux Strategic Consulting and Cross Meridian Group. Second, Veron will cooperate fully with financial regulators and law enforcement. Third, the Ashbourne Foundation will establish an independent restitution fund for every hospital, school, and charity affected by diverted cross-meridian donations. The words settled over the crowd like stones. Julian lunged toward the podium. "You sanctimonious." Commander Thorne moved with stunning speed, stepping between them. No violence followed, none was needed. Julian stopped inches from the commander, chest heaving. The cameras caught everything. Vivian looked at him over Thorne's shoulder, careful. The echo of his own word silenced him. In the far corner of the hall, two men in dark suits entered with badges visible. Behind them came a woman Vivian recognized as Director Maren Holt from the Financial Crimes Bureau. She had sharp grey eyes and the calm walk of someone who never rushed because the law, when properly prepared, did not need to hurry. Julian saw her and lost color. Vivian had met Director Holt 3 weeks earlier in a private office above the old Ashbourne Library. Rain had tapped the windows that day, the same kind of rain that had fallen when Julian first met her. Holt had reviewed the documents in silence while Vivian sat across from her, twisting her wedding ring. "You understand what this means?" Holt had asked. "Yes. If we proceed, your husband may be arrested." Vivian had looked at the ring until the engraving blurred. The heart knows its home before the world knows its name. Then she slid the ring off and placed it on the table. "My husband already left," she said. "What remains is evidence." Now Holt approached the stage. "Julian Cross," she said, "we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with financial fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy related to the diversion of charitable funds and procurement corruption." The hall did not gasp this time. It froze. Julian stared at Vivian, not at the officers. "You planned this?" "Yes," Vivian said. "You let me walk into this." "No," she said. "I gave you every chance not to." His mouth twisted. "You never told me who you were." The accusation almost made her smile. "No," she said. "I waited to see who you were." For the first time that night, real pain crossed his face. Not fear, not anger, pain. It was gone quickly, swallowed by rage, but Vivian saw it. Some old part of him understood. Some buried part remembered the rain, the coffee shop, the chapel, the vows. Some part knew that he had not been trapped by Vivian's secrecy, but revealed by her trust. Director Holt nodded to her officers. Julian stepped back. "Don't touch me." Evelyn cried, "Julian." He looked at his mother then, and Vivian saw the child in him, the son who had spent his life trying to become worthy of Evelyn's impossible pride. The boy who learned love came with conditions and applause mattered more than conscience. The man who had chosen to become exactly what wounded him. For 1 second, Vivian wished she could save that boy. But the man had destroyed too much. The officers approached. Julian tried to speak, then seemed to remember the cameras and lifted his chin. He held out his wrists as though cooperating were dignity rather than surrender. The restraints clicked softly. That sound traveled farther than any shout. Evelyn made a broken noise and moved toward him, but Director Holt signaled another officer. "Mrs. Cross, we also have questions for you." "I have done nothing," Evelyn said. Vivian looked at her. "You burned the wrong dress." Evelyn's head snapped toward her. Vivian touched the signet beneath her gown. "You thought it was my weakness because you thought marriage was the highest thing I owned, but it was never the dress that mattered. It was what it reminded me of." Evelyn's face crumpled for half a breath before pride rebuilt it. Julian was led past Vivian. He stopped beside her. The guards tensed, but he only looked down at her, searching her face as if the answer to his ruin might still be hidden there. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. The question was so quiet the microphones nearly missed it. Vivian felt the room fade. She was back in the chapel, snow on the windows, Julian's trembling hands, the smell of wax and roses. She was back in the hospital, his tears falling onto her wrist. She was back at a kitchen table at 2 a.m., both of them barefoot, eating burnt toast and laughing because the power had gone out and they had decided candles made everything taste better. "Yes," she said. His eyes reddened. "But you loved what power made you feel more than you loved the person who stood beside you." Julian looked away first. They led him through the banquet hall, past guests who had once sought his favor and now shifted aside as if scandal were contagious. Cameras followed him. Serafina watched from the side room doorway, one hand over her mouth. Evelyn stood motionless near the stage, her diamonds glittering like ice over a cracking lake. At 8:46 p.m., Julian Cross left his anniversary banquet in custody. At 8:47 p.m., Vivian finally allowed herself to breathe. But the night was not finished. Thorne leaned toward her. "Your Grace, the board is waiting in the East Conference Room." Vivian nodded. Her ankle throbbed, her gown was ruined, her throat felt raw from words she had held in for years. Yet as she stepped down from the stage, the crowd parted not with affection, but with recognition. That was enough. A young reporter near the aisle called, "Chairwoman Ashbourne, did you plan to reveal yourself tonight?" Vivian paused. Every instinct trained into her by old money and older fear told her to say nothing. The Ashbournes survived by staying private. Veyron Crown Holdings thrived because the world never knew which hand held the controlling pen. Her grandfather had taught her secrecy as armor. But armor could become a prison if worn too long. Vivian turned to the reporter. She could not have been more than 25, with anxious eyes and a recorder clutched like a lifeline. "No," Vivian said, "I plan to celebrate my anniversary." The answer moved through the room more powerfully than any prepared statement. Because beneath the titles, the guards, the Maybachs, and the empire, there was the simplest truth. Vivian had come hopping for one last sign that her marriage could be saved. She had arrived with evidence hidden, orders prepared, and legal authority ready, but a foolish human corner of her heart had still hoped Julian would not use the knife. He had. So she stopped, bleeding quietly. Thorne escorted her from the ballroom into a corridor lined with antique mirrors. In each reflection, Vivian saw a different version of herself: the ruined wife, the hidden heiress, the chairwoman, the orphaned girl, the woman her grandfather had raised, the woman Julian had underestimated, the woman Evelyn had tried to erase. At the end of the corridor, she stopped before one mirror and touched the wine stain on her gown. A memory flickered. Her mother, pale but smiling, sitting at a vanity while 7-year-old Vivian brushed her hair. "Never hate your softness," her mother had whispered. "The world will try to make you hard because hard things are easier to fear, but soft things survive differently. Water breaks stone without becoming stone." Vivian had not understood then. She understood now. The East Conference Room was full when she entered. 6 Veyron board members rose at once. Some had served her grandfather. Some had doubted Vivian when she first inherited. All looked at her now with an expression she did not fully enjoy, relief sharpened by fear. At the far end of the table, a video screen showed 3 more directors calling in from London, Zurich, and Singapore. Documents were arranged in neat stacks. The Ashbourne legal team stood along the wall. A silver fountain pen waited beside the emergency resolutions. For years, Vivian had chaired meetings from behind layers of representation. She voted through proxies. She approved strategy through encrypted channels. Only a handful of people knew the full truth. The rest of the world believed the Ashbourne stake had been dispersed after her grandfather's death. Tonight, concealment ended. "Sit," Vivian said. They sat. No one commented on her torn gown. "Wise of them." General Counsel Helena Ma opened the first file. "Chairwoman, the suspension notices have been delivered. Regulators have acknowledged receipt. Director Holt has confirmed execution of the warrants. We need your signature on the public disclosure statement." Vivian took the pen. Her hand hovered. This was the moment she had feared more than Julian's betrayal. Exposure. Once signed, she could not return to invisibility. Her name would move through markets by morning. Every old family, rival fund, ambitious politician, and desperate opportunist would know Vivian Ashbourne had stepped out of the shadows. Her grandfather's warning returned, not from the sickbed this time, but from years earlier, when she was 12, and he found her hiding in the estate greenhouse after a tutor told her she was too quiet to lead. "Do you know why people shout?" he had asked. "To be heard." Sometimes, but often they shout because they are afraid silence belongs to someone stronger. He had handed her a pruning knife and pointed to a rosebush. Cut only what prevents growth, leave what blooms. Vivian had pruned too much of herself for Julian's family. No more. She signed. The room shifted. Helena Ma slid another document forward, the restitution fund. Vivian signed. The termination of Veillux negotiations. She signed. The cross-meridian asset freeze request. She signed. Each signature felt less like revenge and more like excavation. She was not building a weapon, she was uncovering what had been buried. Money stolen from clinics, false invoices passed through shell firms, research grants delayed while Evelyn purchased jewels, contracts rigged to reward loyalty instead of competence. When she reached the final document, Helena hesitated. Vivian noticed. What is it? The divorce petition, Helena said quietly. We prepared it as instructed. The word landed harder than arrest. Divorce. For years, Vivian had thought of it as an ending too heavy to lift. She had endured insults, loneliness, betrayal, and silence, partly because leaving felt like admitting the marriage had been a mistake from the start. But that was not true, not completely. Some beginnings were real even when endings were necessary. She took the page. The petition was simple, legal, clean. No poetry, no tears, no mention of rain or burnt toast or a chapel full of winter roses. Just names. Vivian Ashbourne Cross. Julian Marcus Cross. Irreconcilable breakdown. Vivian stared at the surname she had worn like a promise and then like a bruise. Use Ashbourne going forward, she said. Helena nodded. Vivian signed. At 9:22 p.m., Vivian ended the marriage Julian had publicly discarded 40 minutes earlier. Outside the conference room, the world was already changing. News alerts began appearing on phones inside the ballroom. Guests read headlines with widening eyes. Hidden owner of Veyron Crown revealed. Cross Meridian under investigation. Anniversary banquet turns into corporate scandal. Mistress-linked consulting firm loses billion-dollar bid. Julian Cross arrested. The reporters who had come for society gossip found themselves holding the first chapter of a financial earthquake. In the side room, Serafina sat beneath a painting of a hunting scene, her gold dress dull under fluorescent light. Director Holt questioned her while a lawyer from Veillux tried and failed to keep up. Serafina's mascara had smudged slightly. She looked younger without triumph. Did Julian Cross provide you with the procurement model? Holt asked. Serafina stared at the table. Her lawyer said, my client will cooperate within appropriate legal boundaries. Holt did not look at him, Ms. Vale. Serafina's hands trembled. Through the half-open door, she could see Julian being placed into a car outside. Cameras flashed against the windows. For months, he had told her she was brilliant, rare, destined. He had promised her introductions, contracts, a future where she would never again need to beg rooms of men for capital. Now he did not even look toward her. Serafina closed her eyes. Yes, she whispered, he provided it. The lawyer stiffened. Holt leaned forward. Did he tell you where he got it? Serafina laughed once, bitter and small. He said his wife had no idea what value looked like. She opened her eyes then, and something in them changed. Not redemption, not yet, but perhaps the first fracture through which truth could enter. He said everyone had a price, she continued. He said Veyron would never know. Holt nodded to the recorder. Serafina kept talking. By 10:05 p.m., Evelyn Cross sat in a separate room refusing tea, counsel, and reality. She had been raised in a house where portraits mattered more than people. Her father had taught her that scandal was worse than sin because sin could be hidden and scandal could not. She married Arthur Cross because he had a name old enough to impress and debts large enough to need her dowry. She gave him 2 sons and learned quickly that sons became currency in families like theirs. The elder son, Damien, had been everything Evelyn admired: cold, disciplined, obedient in public and merciless in private. Julian had been softer. He brought injured birds into the house. He apologized to servants. He once cried when Evelyn dismissed a gardener days before Christmas. She had slapped him for that. Not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to teach. A cross man does not weaken for people paid to leave, she told him. Years later, when Julian began showing cruelty, Evelyn felt relief. She mistook damage for maturity. Now, as Director Holt placed financial records before her, Evelyn stared at the columns of numbers as if they were written in a foreign language. "These transfers came from accounts controlled by you," Holt said. "My son handles business. These are your signatures. My assistants manage paperwork. This is your message instructing staff to destroy Mrs. Ashbourne's property." Evelyn's lips thinned. It was a dress. "It was registered estate property," Holt said. Evelyn looked toward the closed door. "She planned this from the beginning." "No," Holt said. "From the evidence timeline, it appears she began investigating after the theft of confidential procurement materials." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "Do not speak to me as if I am a fool." Holt's expression did not change. "Then do not answer as if you are one." For the first time in decades, Evelyn Cross was in a room she could not dominate. By 10:30 p.m., Vivian stood on the balcony outside the conference room, breathing cold night air. Below, the 12 Maybachs remained in formation. Beyond them, police vehicles, media vans, and clusters of guests filled the hotel drive. The city glittered in the distance, indifferent and alive. Somewhere in that glow were hospitals Veron funded, schools her foundation built, rail lines her company would modernize without Serafina's corruption attached to them. Somewhere were people who would never know how close greed had come to stealing from them. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself. The night air touched the wine stain on her gown and made her shiver. Thorne stepped onto the balcony but kept a respectful distance. He had known Vivian since she was a child, hiding under banquet tables at Ashbourne House to avoid etiquette lessons. Back then, he had been a young security officer assigned to her grandfather. He used to slip her lemon sweets from the staff kitchen and pretend not to notice when she smuggled library books into formal dinners. "You are cold," he said. "I am many things." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Yes, Your Grace." She looked at him. "Do not start." "Chairwoman, then." "That is not better." "No." For a moment, they stood in companionable silence. Then Thorne said, "Your grandfather would be proud." Vivian's throat tightened. "He would be furious. I revealed myself in a stained gown. He would say timing matters more than tailoring." That made her laugh softly, and the sound surprised her. The laughter faded into something more fragile. "I loved him, Thorne," she said. "I know. I kept waiting for Julian to become who he was at the beginning." Thorne looked out at the city. Perhaps he was at the beginning. Vivian absorbed that. It was kinder than saying Julian had always been false. Harder too, it meant grief had more than one body. She was not only mourning the husband who betrayed her, she was mourning the version of him that had existed before ambition, fear, and Evelyn's poison consumed the rest. "I should have left sooner," Vivian whispered. "Perhaps," Thorne said, "but leaving is simple only to those outside the door." Vivian looked down at her bare ring finger. The skin there was pale, marked by years of gold. Inside the ballroom, staff had begun clearing tables no one would eat from. White roses lay scattered across the floor, bruised by footsteps. Vivian noticed one near the balcony threshold, its stem snapped but bloom intact. A thorn caught in the lace of her torn hem. She bent and freed it carefully. Beauty with protection. Not weakness, not decoration, a warning. By 11:03 p.m., the Veron board had approved the public transition plan. Vivian would appear briefly before the press, confirm her role, announce cooperation with authorities, and refuse personal questions. Helena Ma rehearsed the phrasing with her, while a stylist from the hotel offered a clean blazer to cover the ruined gown. Vivian refused at first. Then she caught her reflection again. The gown was stained and torn, but standing in it no longer made her look defeated. It made her look like evidence. A woman could be damaged without being diminished. A dress could be ruined without making its wearer less royal. Still, the night was cold, and the world did not need to see her shiver. She accepted the blazer. Before stepping into the press room, she checked her phone. There were hundreds of messages, board members, old friends, people who had ignored her for years now eager to express shock, admiration, sympathy, usefulness. Buried among them was one message from an unknown number. It contained a photograph. Vivian opened it. For a second, the hallway disappeared. The image showed her wedding dress burning in the cross-house garden incinerator. Flames curled around the silver-threaded bodice. Evelyn stood nearby, smiling faintly. One of the staff members looked away, ashamed. The video had hurt earlier. The photograph hurt differently. In the corner of the image, half hidden near the stone path, stood Julian. Vivian enlarged the photo. He had been there. When Evelyn burned the dress, Julian had watched. He had told Vivian at the banquet he knew nothing of it. He had seemed surprised when Evelyn admitted filming it. Another lie, smaller than fraud, perhaps, smaller than betrayal, but intimate in a way that nearly stole her breath. He had watched the symbol of their vows burn, and then walked into the banquet ready to replace her. Vivian closed the phone. Something inside her settled into finality. No more wondering, no more weighing memories against wounds, no more asking whether some hidden part of him still loved her enough to matter. A burned dress could not be unburned. A witnessed cruelty could not be unwitnessed. When Vivian stepped before the press at 11:17 p.m., her voice was steady. "My name is Vivian Ashbourne," she said. "I am the controlling owner and chairwoman of Veyron Crown Holdings. Tonight, Veyron initiated formal action regarding evidence of procurement misconduct, financial fraud, and misuse of charitable funds connected to Cross Meridian Group and Vale Lux Strategic Consulting. We will cooperate fully with authorities. We will protect affected public projects. We will ensure restitution where harm has occurred." Questions erupted. Were you hiding your identity from your husband? Is this revenge? Did you know about the affair? Will Veyron collapse the Cross family? Are you divorcing Julian Cross? Vivian waited. The room quieted by degrees. "This is not revenge," she said. "Revenge seeks suffering. Accountability seeks truth. What happens next will be determined by evidence, not emotion." A reporter near the front asked, "And personally, Lady Ashbourne, what happens next for you?" Vivian looked into the cameras. For years she had been edited by other people. Evelyn made her small, Julian made her foolish, Serafina made her obstacle, society made her invisible, even Veyron made her myth. Tonight she would answer for herself. "Personally," Vivian said, "I go home." The answer was simple enough to disappoint half the room. But to Vivian, it meant everything. Home was not Cross House, with its cold staircases and portraits of men who never smiled. Home was not Julian's penthouse, where her clothes hung beside secrets. Home was Ashbourne House, with its storm-grey walls, rose gardens, old library, and the bedroom where her mother once sang to her during thunderstorms. Home was the place she had avoided, because returning felt like admitting the marriage failed. Now returning felt like survival. At 11:43 p.m., Vivian left the hotel. The royal guards formed a corridor through the cameras. The night flashed white with photographs. Reporters shouted her name, her real name, and the title she had never used in public. Guests watched from the steps, their faces pale in the glow. Serafina was escorted out through a side entrance. For a moment, Across the driveway, her eyes met Vivian's. There was no smile now, no triumph, only wreckage and perhaps the beginning of remorse. Vivian did not wave. She entered the center Maybach. Thorne sat in front, the door closed, muttering the world. As the convoy pulled away, Vivian looked back once at the hotel. Through the glass doors, she saw Evelyn standing alone beneath the chandelier, surrounded by officers, lawyers, and the remains of the banquet she had planned as an execution. For a heartbeat, Evelyn looked not like a queen, but like a woman trapped inside a kingdom of ash. Vivian turned away. The city blurred past. At 11:58 p.m., her phone rang. Julian. She stared at the name. No title, no heart emoji, no photograph, just Julian. She should have ignored it. Instead, she answered. For several seconds, there was only silence and the faint background noise of a police station. Then Julian said, "Vivian." His voice was different. Stripped of stage, audience, and command, he sounded exhausted, almost young. She said nothing. "I didn't know how far it had gone," he said. The lie was tired before it reached her. Vivian looked at her reflection in the dark window. City lights moved across her face like passing ghosts. "I saw the photograph," she said. His breathing changed. That was confession enough. "I was angry," he whispered. "Mother said it would help me move forward," Serafina said. "Do not put your choices in women's mouths." Silence. Then bitterly, "So that's it." Vivian almost closed her eyes. How like Julian to stand among ruins he built and ask why the roof had fallen. "Yes," she said, "that is it. You'll destroy everything." "No, I stopped protecting what was already destroyed." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "I loved you once." Vivian's throat tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "I know." "Does that mean nothing?" "It means I will grieve," she said. "It does not mean I will return." The line went quiet. At exactly midnight, the convoy crossed the old bridge leading out of the city. Vivian ended the call. No dramatic words, no final curse, no promise of vengeance. Only the soft tap of her thumb against glass. Midnight arrived without music. The woman Julian had kicked out of the banquet was gone. The woman who remained was not untouched, not unbroken, not cold enough to feel nothing. She was simply finished mistaking endurance for love. By dawn, the scandal had become global. Markets opened with cross-meridian in free fall. Banks froze credit. Board members resigned before breakfast. Regulators raided offices in 3 cities. Velux investors issued emergency withdrawal notices. Serafina's company collapsed by noon, not from Vivian's anger, but from the hollow truth beneath its numbers. Julian was formally charged within 48 hours. Evelyn fought longer. She hired attorneys famous for turning guilt into fog. She claimed age, confusion, betrayal by advisors, manipulation by her son. But evidence has a patience arrogance does not. Messages surfaced. Transfers matched. Staff testified. The video of the dress became less important legally than Vivian had expected, but more important publicly. People understood ashes. They understood the cruelty of destroying a symbol and laughing beside the flames. The trial began 8 months later. Vivian attended only the first day and the last. On the first day, Julian looked for her the moment he entered the courtroom. His hair was shorter. His suit was plain. He seemed smaller without rooms bending toward him. When he saw her, his face shifted through pride, shame, resentment, and something like longing. Vivian looked back steadily. She wore black, not for mourning him, but for mourning who she had been with him. The prosecutors did not need theatrics. They had documents, recordings, transactions, testimony, and Serafina veil. Serafina took the stand on the 3rd week. She admitted to receiving confidential materials, bribing a procurement assistant, and coordinating with Julian to influence the Veyron bid. Her voice shook, but she did not retreat. In exchange for cooperation, her sentence was reduced, though her career in consulting was finished. When she passed Vivian outside the courtroom one afternoon, she stopped. "I'm sorry," Serafina said. Vivian studied her. The apology was late, it was inadequate, it did not restore trust, money, or dignity, but it was also not nothing. "Become someone who does not need to say that again," Vivian replied. Serafina nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away. Evelyn never apologized. Even at trial, she dressed as if the jury were guests at her table. She denied what could be denied, minimized what could not, and stared at Vivian with the same hatred she had shown on the stage. But once, during testimony from a former cross-house maid, Evelyn's mask slipped. The maid described Vivian sitting alone in the kitchen after banquets, eating leftovers, because Evelyn had ordered staff not to serve her at the family table. Julian lowered his head. Evelyn looked annoyed, not ashamed. The jury noticed. On the last day, the verdicts came one after another. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Julian closed his eyes. Evelyn gripped the table until her knuckles whitened. Vivian did not smile. Justice, she discovered, did not feel like victory. It felt like a door closing in a house she no longer lived in. Julian received a lengthy prison sentence for financial crimes and obstruction. Evelyn received a shorter sentence due to age and lesser direct involvement, though the court rejected her claim that she had been merely ornamental. The judge described the Cross family's conduct as a culture of entitlement disguised as legacy. Vivian remembered those words. A culture of entitlement disguised as legacy. Months later, she had them written in a private notebook beneath another sentence from her grandfather. Cut only what prevents growth, leave what blooms. 1 year after the banquet, Ashbourne House opened its East Wing as a public medical research library funded by the Restitution Program. The first exhibit displayed recovered charitable records, not as scandal trophies, but as a lesson in transparency. In a quiet side room, behind protective glass, Vivian placed the only surviving piece of her wedding dress, a silver-threaded fragment rescued from the incinerator ash by one of the ashamed staff members who had later testified. Beside it, there was no mention of Julian. Only a small plaque. Some things burned reveal what cannot be destroyed. Vivian stood before it on opening morning, wearing a simple cream suit and her grandmother's pearls. Children from a local school wandered through the library halls. Doctors, researchers, and students filled rooms once reserved for aristocrats and their secrets. Thorne approached with 2 cups of tea. "You have reporters waiting," he said. "Do they look hungry?" "Starving." She accepted the tea. "Let them wait 5 minutes." He smiled. "As you wish." Vivian looked out the window at the rose garden. The bushes had been pruned hard that winter. For weeks, they looked ruined, bare stems, cut branches, soil littered with what had been removed. Then spring came and growth returned fierce and green. Her mother had been right. Water broke stone differently. Vivian still had difficult nights. Sometimes she woke from dreams of chandeliers and laughter. Sometimes she missed Julian with a grief that embarrassed her, not because she wanted him back, but because love did not vanish simply because truth arrived. Sometimes she touched the pale mark where her ring had been and felt both freedom and ache. Healing was not a banquet entrance. It did not arrive with Maybachs, guards, or cameras. It came quietly, in unsigned divorce papers becoming final, in sleeping through the night, in laughing without guilt, in walking through Ashbourne House without feeling haunted by failure, in learning that being alone was not the same as being discarded. On the first anniversary of the scandal, Vivian received a letter from prison. Julian's handwriting was still elegant. She almost threw it away. Instead, she opened it in the greenhouse, where her grandfather had once taught her to prune roses. "Vivian, I do not expect forgiveness. I have spent months trying to decide whether I was a bad man, pretending to be good, or a weak man who became bad because it was easier. The answer changes depending on how honest I am willing to be. I blamed my mother, Serafina, pressure, money, fear, even you. But the truth is uglier. I liked being admired. I liked being envied. I liked that cruelty made me feel powerful when I was afraid. I did love you. I know that does not save me. Maybe it makes what I did worse. I watched the dress burn. You know that now. I could say I was numb. I could say mother pushed me, but I watched. Then I went to the banquet and humiliated you. That is the moment I return to every night. You once asked me years ago what kind of man I wanted to be. I said honest. You smiled like you believed me. I am sorry, I made a liar of us both. Julian. Vivian read it twice. Then she folded it. She did not cry, though she felt tears somewhere far beneath the surface, like water under ice. The apology mattered, not enough to change the past, not enough to reopen the door, but enough to let one small, poisoned memory loosen its grip. She placed the letter in a drawer, not with love tokens, not with legal files, but with old things that had once mattered and no longer ruled her. Outside, roses climbed the glass. That afternoon, Vivian stood before Veyron Crown Holdings' annual summit for the first time openly as chairwoman. Thousands of employees watched in person and online. For years, they had known policies, directives, and investments shaped by an unseen controlling hand. Now they saw her, not a myth, not a socialite, not a discarded wife, but a woman who had survived the cost of silence and chosen a different kind of power. She did not mention Julian by name. She did not mention Evelyn. She did not mention Serafina. The greatest danger to any institution, Vivian said, is not ambition. Ambition builds. The danger is entitlement, because entitlement consumes while calling itself destiny. We will not be that kind of company. We will not hide theft behind tradition, cruelty behind loyalty, or silence behind dignity. Dignity without truth is only decoration. The room was still. Vivian looked across the crowd, and for a moment she saw her grandfather in the back row as clearly as if he stood there, silver hair, stern eyes, proud mouth. She saw her mother by the window, soft and smiling. She saw the girl she had been hiding under tables with books. She saw the young bride in winter lace. She saw the woman at 8:17 p.m., stained with wine, surrounded by laughter, seconds away from being thrown out. Then she saw herself now. Power, she continued, is not proven by how many people kneel before you. It is proven by how many people can stand because you used it well. Applause rose slowly at first, then filled the hall. Vivian accepted it without shrinking. Later, when the summit ended, she walked alone through the glass corridor connecting Veyron Tower to the foundation building. Below, the city moved in bright streams of traffic. A line of black cars waited at the curb, but not 12 Maybachs this time. She no longer needed a convoy to prove she had arrived. Her phone buzzed. A message from Helena Ma. The final cross-meridian liquidation order has been approved. Restitution payments begin Monday. Vivian exhaled. A dynasty had ended, not because Vivian hated it, but because it had mistaken survival for permission to devour. Cross-Meridian's remaining assets would be sold, its victims compensated, its name reduced to a cautionary case taught in business ethics courses by professors who would never know the smell of burned silk or the sound of handcuffs in a ballroom. Vivian stepped outside instead of taking the private elevator. Rain was falling. Not heavily, just enough to silver the pavement and blur the city lights. Her driver hurried forward with an umbrella, but Vivian lifted a hand. "I'll walk a little." "Your Grace, it's raining." "I know." She walked beyond the awning, letting the rain touch her hair, her face, her open palms. Years ago, rain had brought Julian into her life. For a long time, that memory had made rain painful, as if the weather itself had betrayed her. Now the rain felt like weather again, nothing more, nothing less. A young woman passing by recognized her and stopped. "Lady Ashbourne," she asked nervously. Vivian turned. The woman clutched a folder to her chest. She looked like an intern or junior analyst, soaked at the shoulders, eyes wide with the panic of someone late to something important. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I just wanted to say what you did last year. It made me leave a situation I thought I had to endure." She swallowed. "Thank you." Vivian felt the words settle somewhere deeper than applause. "What is your name?" she asked. "Mara." "Mara," Vivian said gently, "do not thank me for leaving a burning room. Just promise me you will not go back because you miss the warmth." The young woman's eyes filled. "I promise." Vivian smiled and let her go. That night at Ashbourne House, Vivian walked into the old chapel for the first time since the divorce became final. The building stood behind the rose gardens, small and grey beneath climbing ivy. Dust softened the pews. Moonlight spilled through narrow windows. The arch where she had married Julian was bare now, stripped of winter flowers. For a while, she simply stood there. The chapel held both grief and innocence. She had avoided it because she feared the memories would accuse her, but as she moved down the aisle, she felt no accusation, only sadness, only release. At the front, beneath the arch, she removed the thin gold ring from her clutch. She had found it weeks earlier in a velvet box at the back of her dressing table. The engraved words were still visible. "The heart knows its home before the world knows its name." For a long time, she had hated the sentence. Now she understood it differently. Her heart had known home before Julian, before marriage, before betrayal. Home had been her own soul, her own name, her own truth. She had simply wandered far from it. Vivian placed the ring on the stone ledge beneath the window. Not as an offering, not as a memory she wished to preserve. As a marker for the woman who had once believed love required disappearance. Then she turned and walked out. In the rose garden, the air smelled of rain and earth. Thorn waited near the path, pretending not to have kept watch. "Everything all right?" he asked. Vivian looked back at the chapel once. "Yes," she said, "everything that matters." The following spring, Veyron Crown Holdings won the Crown Rail modernization project through a transparent public bid. No stolen models, no private influence, no hidden mistress, no desperate husband, no corrupt family pressing fingers into the process. The contract was large, but Vivian no longer thought of it as the prize Serafina had chased. She thought of it as tracks, stations, workers, passengers, mornings made easier for people who would never know her name. That pleased her. The Ashbourne Foundation's restitution fund restored 3 clinics, reopened 2 rural schools, and completed a pediatric wing cross-meridian donations had promised but never delivered. At the dedication ceremony, a little boy with a bandaged arm handed Vivian a paper rose he had made in art class. "It has thorns," he told her proudly, pointing to jagged green triangles glued along the stem. Vivian knelt to accept it. "Then it is a proper rose." "Roses need thorns," he said. "Yes," Vivian replied, "they do." Years passed, and people retold the story of the anniversary banquet until it became almost myth. Some versions made Vivian colder than she had been. Some made Julian more monstrous. Some made Serafina a mastermind or a fool, Evelyn a villainess from old theatre, Thorn a knight, the Maybachs a royal procession summoned by fate. The truth was messier. Vivian had not walked into that banquet fearless. She had been terrified. She had still loved a memory. She had still hoped, even with evidence ready, that Julian might choose decency at the last second. The guards had not arrived by magic. They had been waiting because Vivian's legal team insisted on protection. The dozen Maybachs had not been vanity. They had carried board members, council, security, and regulators through a city clogged by event traffic. But myths were built from symbols, and Vivian understood why the world preferred the image. A woman thrown out. A conv arriving. A hidden crown revealed. A cruel husband ruined. It was neat, satisfying, almost beautiful. Real life had been wine stains, shaking hands, legal documents, grief after midnight, and learning to sleep alone. Still, Vivian did not correct every retelling. Some stories helped people survive. Somewhere, another woman might hear the myth and recognize the truth beneath it, that humiliation was not the end, that silence could be strategy until it became a cage, and that leaving with dignity was not the same as leaving quietly. On the 5th anniversary of the banquet, Vivian hosted a small dinner at Ashbourne House for Foundation scholars. No chandeliers imported from Venice, no reporters, no society photographers, just long wooden tables in the library, bowls of soup, fresh bread, laughter, and rain tapping at the windows. After dinner, a student asked her, "Is it true you had 12 Maybachs and royal guards rescue you from your husband?" The room went still with curiosity. Vivian smiled into her tea. "No," she said, "I rescued myself. The Maybachs were transportation." The students laughed. Thorne, standing near the door, hid a smile. Later that night, after the guests left, Vivian walked through the gallery where Ashbourne portraits watched from gilded frames. Her grandfather's portrait hung at the end, stern and proud, one hand resting on a cane crowned with a silver rose. Vivian stopped before him. "I cut what prevented growth," she said softly. The painted eyes offered no answer, but the house creaked gently around her, old wood settling like approval. She continued to the conservatory. There beneath glass bright with moonlight, roses bloomed out of season. Red, white, blush, gold, each stem guarded by thorns, each bloom open anyway. Vivian touched one petal. The world had once mistaken her softness for permission. Julian had mistaken her silence for dependence. Evelyn had mistaken cruelty for strength. Serafina had mistaken ambition for entitlement. And Vivian, for too long, had mistaken endurance for love. Not anymore. At 8:17 p.m. years before, she had stood alone in a ruined gown while the room laughed. By midnight, the laughter had ended. But what mattered most came after midnight, after the cameras, after the arrests, after the headlines stopped using words like mistress, billionaire, royal guards, and scandal. What mattered was the morning she woke and did not reach for a ring. The afternoon she signed a scholarship grant and felt joy without needing anyone to witness it. The night rain touched her face and no longer brought Julian back. The day she looked at ashes and saw not destruction, but soil. Vivian Ashbourne did not become powerful because a dozen Maybachs arrived. They arrived because she had finally stopped hiding the power she already possessed. And in the quiet years that followed, she built something the Cross dynasty never could. Not a name people feared. Not a fortune people worshipped. A legacy that allowed others to stand. That was the part Julian had never understood. That was the part Evelyn had burned too late to destroy. That was the part Vivian carried forward, not as a weapon, but as a crown she no longer needed to conceal.